So the question has arisen over the years, and I'm constantly asking, you know, people who are really more evolved on the path about this question. And I don't think anyone has a clear answer. And that question is, what is, if everything that we are speaking and doing in the world is creating in the world, then how are we going to bring awareness about, while not simultaneously creating in the world what we don't want to see? And no one has had the answer. I don't have the answer either. And it's a very, I'd love to have some new perspectives on this, because I think it's really pertinent, because there are movements which kind of, so the closest I've come to finding a solution for that is working with one foot in both sides. That is, bringing forth information to create, to come to integration, to come to greater awareness, to increase the awareness of those around us, and then keeping the other foot in this really exalted place of not letting that information affect us on a vibrational level, so that we can continue to at least vibrate out, because I think vibration is more powerful than what we're speaking in the world. And that is, our vibration really ties deeply into our actions. So we can speak awareness, and we can bring, our studies forward, and then we can continue to cultivate the inner vibration that allows us to not get sucked in to the manifestations of these lower narratives, of these darker narratives. So this is the closest I've come, but I still feel like speaking is creating in the world. So there is that element of trickery in bringing forth greater awareness. And then being mindful of how much that information is affecting us. Because there was a period where anything that I brought forth was really detrimental to my inner vibration. So the healing was occurring on the inside, to not be so affected by it, but yet to have the power of sight to see what was going on, not ignore it, yet be balanced in both. So yeah, that was just something that I wanted to touch on briefly. And I feel that it's important to reflect on that, and to also find where you are in regards vis-a-vis those concepts within yourself. So I wanted to share a little bit about my experience. I think we all have shamanic energy to a certain degree, some less, some more. But I think in general, there's kind of these two types. There's people who are pulling in collective energy, and it's sort of controlling them, and they are sort of hypnotized to what they're being, the energy that they're pulling in from the collective. Like, they just become that. And then you have people who have evolved, or maybe just have shamanic energy within their lineage, which really do work in these other realms, and don't pull in information and become it, but simply pull in information to untangle it and to transmute it. And so also looking at where you are on that scale is really important. There's so many different groups out there. And one of the things that I've come to learn, and I'd be interested in hearing about other people's experiences about this, is that these different groups that we connect to, that hold deeper wisdom, deeper knowledge, occult knowledge, they have their own traditions embedded within them. And so they have their own traditions and they have their own rites of passage, which are embedded deep within the archetypal energies of these groups. So people associating with different groups might not always understand the energies that are involved. And even people who are high up in these groups might not understand the energies that are involved. So when I first started embarking on my path, I was, you can picture the tarot card, the Fool, walking off the cliff. And I was just sort of going along, and I had this really beautiful, innocent, open heart. And I feel, like guarding the innocence is so important, because there's just so much beauty, but it's so extremely powerful that it pushes so much to the surface, that pure light energy. And so I was moving forward on my path, and then I embarked on, I've been doing this since my 20s, so just joining different groups, different communities, and getting involved, learning what they had to say about life, the mysteries, different traditions, different ways of seeing the world, and different magical systems, different spiritual systems. And I had been initiated into a bunch. And this applies to, like, if you're getting initiated by a Reiki master, or if you're going, and you're being initiated by a more contemporary occult, magical occult, or, one of the more traditional older ones, the Knights of Templar, the Rosicrucians, all of these different groups carry very specific energy. And the members might not always be aware, because they haven't done the research. They don't really know where these different groups originate from, what sort of energies pulled them together and created their tone in the world and their vibration, and how that ripples into you when you encounter these groups, and how it affects you, how it affects your life, and what sort of rites of passage you will be encountering once you've come into contact with these different groups. And this includes Christian rites of passage, every religion, including these different groups that are more modern and more artificial, less natural. So when we encounter, like, let's say if you get initiated into Reiki, I'll share a little bit about my experience. When I was initiated into the Reiki tradition, Uzu Sensei, the woman who was initiating me, and I just, I found her online, connected with her. I was like, yeah, this, but again, I was the fool, just walking forward with open arms, and not really doing the hard research on things, because you only learn as you grow. So I did the initiation with her, and she had been involved in a lot of previous groups, spiritual groups, different traditions. And she had eventually in her late 50s, gone into Reiki. So she had all of these energies that she was carrying within her energetic body of previous initiations that she had gone through. And when she initiated me, we did the sessions, and then at the end, I had to go through all of these different practices. I had to eliminate all toxins, like do this huge detox, spend time in nature. There are a bunch of things that I had to do in order to prepare for the initiation, the final initiation, after the studying of what this practice was all about. And when I sat there on the chair and she began to do the initiation, which was passed down from, it might have gotten misconstrued, and that's another thing, but was passed down from Uzu Sensei, in terms of the symbols and the vibrations that you're applying to that person. I felt a huge shock through my body, and then I started getting images of Egypt. That was the first thing that came to me. And it was very visual. So there was a lot that was coming through, and it had definitely activated something within me. At the time, I didn't have enough knowledge to really understand what it was connecting to. But as time went on, I realized that I had pulled in a lot of information, other energetic information within her field that had nothing to do with Reiki, and that had to do with her experiences, different groups that she had been connected to previously. And then I had to work through all of that. So what happens when we come into contact with a group is we essentially begin to merge our consciousness, especially when we're initiated, but it happens depending on how open you are, even if it's not a deliberate initiation, you could be initiated by different groups without your knowledge, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But being initiated, when you're initiated, especially initiated, you open your consciousness up to receive the blueprint or the tone of that group. And so you begin to connect with all the members of that group and begin to interact. So the thoughts that are coming in, right, we're constantly, the mind is a shared mind, and when we connect with these different groups, we open up very more specifically to a certain shared mind. And then you'll start getting downloads from different members of that group. So if those members are not in congruence or in alignment with what your blueprint is, what your values are, how you want to live your life, then there's going to be a lot of antagonism that builds up, because you're now connecting on a more intimate level with a group that you don't necessarily want to be receiving messages from. And then you have all this stuff that builds up around that, right? And it's an internal battle. Essentially, we end up, it's our will against ourselves, because you can't blame anybody else if you've opened up to a specific group and you're receiving messages, connecting telepathically with different people in that group, feeling different sensations depending on how much you're a feeler. Begin to feel empathically what's going on with other people in that group. You can't blame them, because it's not like they're walking into your home and saying, okay, you have to live your life this way, or, you're essentially in a battle with yourself to disconnect from those people and that energy. Now, depending on how far the traditions go back with this group and how powerful the energy has been built up over time, you will have more trouble disconnecting. And this is really important, because some of these groups are extremely powerful, especially when you have groups that are aware of these different occult layers, these different layers of knowledge, just different understandings that go way beyond what normal people are learning as they embark on their journeys. If they're working with concentrated energy and they're, involved in different ceremonies, like when you go to church and you're involved every Sunday, you go and you experience the ceremony and you have certain rituals, that energy becomes more powerful and it can embed more deeply into your consciousness. So this is why we do the research on different groups that we're interacting with. And I recommend researching, like, before getting involved in any group, before getting initiated by any tradition. You want to spend an equal, if not more, amount of time studying and researching, knowing and understanding where these different groups come from, what sort of energy they're cultivating, what sort of energy their rituals and ceremonies are cultivating, and what their intentions are, to use those energies for. And then after all of that studying and understanding the different groups and understanding, what's out there and really getting into these deeper layers, then you will have, I think, a good perspective on what you want to get involved with. So a lot of the experiences that I've had over the years, I didn't do any studying going in. I simply encountered different groups and interacted with them and then had experiences, wrote about them, my personal journals, some online, but had to kind of untangle all of these concepts for myself and all of these, all of this occult knowledge for myself. And later on, when I started studying more in depth, everything I had experienced and most of the understandings that I came to were confirmed by people who brought forth information about this stuff like thousands of years ago. And this is where you really start to gain confidence, because you understand that, there's an objective reality to this stuff. And it's not just you and your own experience. It's a collective experience that's happening. And there are real things that can be isolated and understood to be the result of different actions that we take in the world. And so, depending on how attuned you are, the more telepathic you'll be with different members of different groups. And the practice of coming back into center when you're interacting with any group, I think, is so essential. And that should be something that should be done at the beginning when you're studying, before even getting initiated by different groups, is really spend that time coming back into learning how to come back into your center, learning how to connect with your core. And even though I had been doing that, like daily practice, there's still so many subtle things that I was doing wrong, that was leaving myself open. And the last thing you want to do is be open to the wrong group. So there are people that are working with groups that are really on the light side of things, and there are people that are working with groups that are on the dark side of things. And we can't get it twisted. A lot of the things that we see in the world as light are actually dark, and a lot of the things that we see that are dark are actually light. So we really have to gain the experience We really have to do the studies to understand where things are rooted in. Like, where are they rooted from? Where is that essence of that group coming from? What is it rooted in? And so the last thing you want to do is, be that fool walking on the path and encounter a group that is on the dark side and that is working on the left-hand path, from the left-hand path. Because this is where you can seriously hurt yourself, damage yourself, your energetic body, and have it trickle into your physical body. Because the left-hand path is just this pure chaos. It doesn't care. There's no morality to it whatsoever. So although we can distinguish between personal morality, right, and this kind of these, what's right and wrong embedded by society, there's also this universal sort of understanding of morality, which is just the universal laws at play, cause and effect, along with the other 7 Hermetic principles. And if you don't know those and you're working on a left-hand path, let me tell you, you're going to be shown quickly what not working with those principles can do, and it can be very harmful. So a lot of people go to different ceremonies, even when we're speaking of cacao ceremonies, heart-centered ceremonies, different ceremonies for detoxing and cleansing, medicine, secret medicine ceremonies. And the people involved could be on a left-hand path, and they might not even know it because they're just encountering the information at the same time as you are. And that's the irony. We're all learning and moving forward. But there are people who I have encountered who are well aware of information, occult information and knowledge, and that take advantage of people who are just on the path because they're easy targets. And these people get off at, sort of breaking down the innocence of people who just haven't, just embarking on the path, haven't done the studies for themselves, and are ignorant about a bunch of things. So I've seen, in particular, one group doing that, like over and over and over again. I just see women coming out of this group like completely destroyed. And it's not my place to go and interfere with what's happening there, but it is my place to, at that time, to figure out like what was going on. And so if we're going to be studying the mysteries, and we're going to be getting involved in, understanding energies and how they work, we're going to encounter the light and we're going to encounter the dark. There's no getting around that. And then it's up to you to choose once you know. But you can share information that will help people on their path. And so as you connect to these different groups, if your values are not attuned, let's say you connect to a left-hand path and you're connecting, you're open, and you're telepathically beginning to connect to the tone of that group energy, and it is just constantly bombarding you with messages that are not in alignment with who you are. They don't resonate with who you are at your core, and you're not aware of what's going on. It can be very tricky, right? And a lot of people end up saying yes to many things that they would originally say no to before they entered that group, because the group energy of a group that is very committed and that has, does its practice regularly, kind of builds this momentum with the energy, and then can focus that energy and move it in a direction. So if you're getting initiated into a group and then that energy is already really powerful, and then they focus that energy on that one new member or that one person that they're targeting, you're getting hit by not only the culmination of the power and energy within that group, but you're getting hit by the focused attention by a large group during a ceremony. So this is really important stuff, and people need to understand and study all of this before they enter their path, and not just go and get initiated by any group. There's also an interesting occurrence that happens when you're interacting with different people from these groups, especially if it's a very solid group that is committed, is that your first layer of the first layer of energy that you encounter will be, when you're interacting with any member of the group, will be that egregor, that collective energy within that group, the tone within that group. That's the first layer that you'll encounter. So if you're involved in a group and you might not have any idea, but they're invoking different energies, light or dark, that energy you're going to encounter when you simply start interacting with that person. And the people involved in that group might not be aware of how that energy is impacting the people around them. That's one layer. And then the other layer is, even if a person moves on, let's say they've been initiated into some spiritual group, some, whether it's Reiki or some religious group, and and then they decide over time that they no longer want to be involved with this group, and they move on. What still ends up happening is often the energy that was invoked during the initiation and then embedded into that person's energetic field will still carry on with them. So doing not the initiation, but the ritual of disconnecting becomes just as important. And there's always residuals. It's not so easy to disconnect from something. It's easy to just jump in and say, okay, I'm doing this, but it's not so easy to always disentangle ourselves from the occurrences that affected our energy field and that have embedded themselves in our energy field. So then when that person moves on, they get involved in different groups, that energy is still attached to them. And then anybody who interacts with them has to interact with that layer of energy, that egregor, that manifestation. And it could be an animal spirit. It could be a different belief, simply a belief that is focused on within that group, that has started to materialize, in the sense, has become its own in the etheric realm, has taken on more form. And so that energy form you will interact with when you're interacting with this person, if they haven't been able to disconnect completely. So there's all these really interesting things that we need to learn about. And there's so many people that are just kind of going about their path and, well, I'm gonna go I keep on going back to Reiki, but it's so popularized. But it could even be different yoga traditions, right? With these different gurus, and understanding really what those energies are and what these people were involved with in terms of reaffirming different energetic patterns and rituals. Because when something has been done for centuries, the what gets embedded into that collective mind whenever anybody begins to interact in those group studies or in those practices are a series of rites of passage, especially if you get initiated. But it really depends on how strong the energy is and how long it's been building for, and how alive it is in the field. But usually anything that's survived for a very long time has a more strength to it, has more power to affect change. And within the subconscious mind, we start picking up on the tradition. We start picking up on the rites of passage involved. And all of a sudden, our life can start exhibiting the symptoms of those rites of passage, meaning we, through just energetic osmosis, we begin to live out those rites of passage because we've connected with that group. And you don't even have to study. They will come in through consciousness, through these, through this energetic kind of egregor, energetic, form that's been built, that's kind of encoded into anybody who is carrying on that tradition. So then you will start to embark on a specific initiation, and the universe will start to bring forth the energies, the people, the situations necessary for you to have those rites of passage, for you to experience them. And so this is very deep, right? Like, what are we getting involved with in life? Like, there's so much unseen, there's so much hidden. And if you have opened up to the universal kind of mind, you can see how these energies connect, and you can begin to tap into telepathy. You can experiment and understand, how all these things play out, remote viewing, whatnot, working with energy forms, cultivating energy forms. But this is all of lesser magic. And what I mean by that is all of these different systems, of spiritual systems that have been existing for a very long time, exist in the realm of mind. And it's a very powerful realm. It is one of the layers of our being that we can't get away from. Or we can, but in general, we're constantly interacting with it. There is a layer that moves above that allows us to bypass a lot of the things we would be afflicted by when encountering these different groups, when just, encountering life in the world, society. And that ties into this mystical, so it's a spiritual realm that it's very powerful, it's very mystical, and it is closer to the creator of all things. So it's closer to the monad. It's closer to, super consciousness. And when we've been too involved in a group, or we've kind of gotten lost in different traditions, have been entangled by different energies from different groups, can always move into this space. And it requires settling into the energy, really tapping into the highest form of consciousness that we can tap into, like the highest state of consciousness that we can tap into. And this is kind of like, it's, it moves beyond the oversoul even. It taps into the highest realm. And from there, we can kind of cleanse our system, which is cleansing the mind. Because the only way we're truly affected by all these things is when we are in the mind. And so to move beyond that is such an invaluable tool. But I think it's something that happens over time, and perhaps not everybody will have the opportunity to tap into that space. But I know a lot of people born with the Mayan tone of 13 can tap into that space. But essentially, the mind is a battlefield with the self, because as we interact with all these energies, all these different groups, these different overlays, these imprints, all of this different hypnosis within society, we are interacting with these different layers that we're, attached to for some reason within ourselves, the more open you are, the more innocent you are, the more imprintable you are, the more these energies can affect you, bringing you into different states of obsession or, self-depreciation. And so my recommendation is for everybody to really study study all forms. If you're interested in spirituality and in deepening your knowledge about the mysteries, it's like to study as much as you can before getting involved in any group. But we live and learn as we go, right? So we can pass on the information, and if someone hears this and they think to themselves, yes, this is wisdom speaking, this is wise advice, I shall take it, then all the best to you. There's very few people that actually can listen to elders and take advice. Most of us are pretty headstrong and end up, thinking that we know everything, and just diving into things, and I'm going to figure this out for myself, and I know, and the ego is so strong. But eventually the ego will break down. It happens to us all. And that's when we can really start gaining knowledge and wisdom about things. And that's part of the hero's journey. And it's part of how we come into this deeper knowledge and wisdom. So this was really important information that I wanted to share. And this also ties into different energies that we're encountering out in the world, right? We have society has secret groups, has religious symbols, religious rites of passage, dark occult rites of passage, embedded within every aspect of it. So we are constantly coming into contact with different layers of energy, different thought forms, whether you're watching the news, right, or you're reading the paper, like whatever information is getting put out by a specific group mentality, because everyone is connecting to a different group, and everyone is, either has been initiated by a group through their upbringing, right, the beliefs that were passed down to them through their upbringing, or later on more deliberately and purposefully became initiated into different groups and then took on that consciousness. And so we're constantly being imposed upon, like whether or not we realize it, we're constantly living out different beliefs and blueprints and layers of belief and layers of narrative, layers of where these different groups want to take society, right? So they all have their agenda. They all have their intentions, and they all have their methods for moving society in that specific direction. So the whole thing that took place in 2020, you can see as a huge rite of passage for humanity. And there are different groups that had very specific intentions to use what was occurring, different groups that were even participating in the creation of what was occurring in order to move things in one direction versus another. And people are having to disentangle from that. They're having to awaken to what sort of rites of passage and what sort of knowledge, intention, agendas, organizations, groups they are a part of. And we're constantly like a layer peeling back these layers of the onion and realizing what we're a part of more and more until we get to this source, right? But life in general that's the process. So even the most advanced are having to go through different moments of awakening and realizing what they're a part of. So this is going to be accelerating more and more. I think this Saturday, the solar eclipse gives us an opportunity to really create ritual and ceremony with ourselves, to deepen that connection with ourself, with our blueprint, with, you know, the universal will. And I think this is one of the more trickier things, because as we connect to these different groups and we've been initiated, whether consciously or, you know, unconsciously, whether it was forced upon us or whether we willingly walked through it, we're constantly having to come back into the self to really connect with not the will of what is happening, not the will of these groups and organizations, but really universal will. Like, you know, and be in that flow, and where we've gone beyond the mind and we're just moving with this really intuitive body of understanding. Like, I don't understand, but I know I have to do this. It's just so strong in me because my connection is so great. And so we can seize this opportunity. I always understood, you know, as I began to embark on my journey, I had different knowledge and wisdom embedded within me from previous lives, from past lives. So that knowledge just was awoken very easily. And the sight was just there. So I understand that, you know, enforcing our will upon other people is not actually going to solve anything. And it's really about coming into the most alignment with ourselves, our blueprint, like our oversoul, our monad, if you want to use that language. Really coming into alignment with what is meant to transpire on this bigger scale. And there's definitely some unanswered questions, because we're all battling our own. We all want to bring forth, we all have our own beliefs about what is positive, what is negative, how humanity, of course, humanity should take. And I think it's, you know, there is a personal will involved that we cannot separate ourselves from. But I think all of these things, taking all these things into consideration, and then really trying to amp up our connection to self and amp up our own vibration, while staying aware of what's going on, is the purpose of using these celestial energies. And also different groups, you know, going into that vibration for themselves, they can use collective energies. So if you have a group of 200 people, 600 people that are all working towards the same end goal, right? To bring a specific outcome, to bring a specific manifestation into the world, like, that's going to be really powerful too. And so you have all these groups kind of with their own agendas based on their understanding of what is best. And I feel like as I observe these different groups, there's some really interesting things that are clashing right now. And I'm really wondering where this is going to go. I feel like the groups can work together, but I also feel like so many groups have been infiltrated, right? And it's that process of peeling the onion. Like, so many groups are partaking in things that I don't think they realize completely what that is, right? Because there's many different facets to one thing. We can look at, like, there's no way, there's no possibility that we can support the same people that also have, that might have one hand in a good agenda, but then also have one hand in a negative agenda, right? And that's where people get confused. You have these people who are high up in different organizations, groups, and then they're promoting things that resonate with both sides. And I think that is the trickery involved in some of these darker occults. That's how they play on people. And then you can also be connecting to different groups, and we can get into galactic races and connecting to these different bodies of consciousness, and then get hijacked by a specific body of consciousness, by a specific channel, and then we start channeling information that it's just like totally confusing us. We think we're moving in the right direction, and then boom, and that's the thing about this solar eclipse is Uranus is involved. Uranus, sudden changes. So I think a lot of people are just going to have these like huge awakenings, myself included. I think, we're all going to have these huge awakenings that just bring us into this higher awareness of where maybe we've been in our own deception, where we've been playing into different narratives that are not what they are saying they are, right? So I'm really interested in finding out where all this is going to go, because there are definitely different timelines happening, especially in regards to ELON. I don't even want to say his name because I don't want to focus energy too much, but especially in regards to ELON, there's so much there that is going to be uncovered. And I actually predicted, I had this little site and I just was experimenting. I was putting out information where different predictions, and no one, like the only follower I had was the MIT labs, of course. They found me, but I just wanted to kind of see, and everything that I was predicting was coming true, was coming forth. And and that's another thing about, like, if we're participating in creating these things when we're predicting them. But I don't think that's the case. But I still think that I want to align with predicting things that are in alignment with where I want to go, not predicting, things that are in alignment with where I don't want to go, or where I don't want to see the future of humanity go. So I predicted that he would be assassinated. And I'm really curious to know if he was potentially already assassinated, right? Like, this is how like fictional, like reality is right now. He might have been assassinated and his body's being used. That is a possibility. But we're going to see where all of this comes to a head. And, there's also a lot of information on both sides that are very different about the use of gold. One states that it fractures consciousness. And my innate understanding was that we can't use anything really to get us to that state of, the gold of consciousness. It requires a lot of work and integration, spiritual development to get there. I don't think it's possible just to take something. I think it could help for an instance, but I do kind of understand where it could just fracture the person, because A, they're not ready. B, they have to really come into the understanding of what their own light is. Like, becoming their own source of light is what the claims are being made that, different races that were using gold were not able to come to their own source of light, that were not able to fuel their own life force. So I'm really curious to see where that's going to go too. And being divine feminine, I am always finding reasons to embrace everyone. And this is the innocence that, sorry, but I'll never lose it. It is part of that beautiful energy that I can bring forth because it's also in my blueprint. And so, watching how all of these different things are playing out, it's like we're all trying to come into balance. And yeah, I have strong boundaries, right? And this is something else that, really came forward. It's the understanding that, putting up boundaries has nothing to do, has nothing to do with the heart closing. We can put up really strong boundaries with people and keep our hearts open. Keeping our hearts open is equivalent to keeping, maintaining our well-being and our vibe. And really fortifying that, coming into strength with that divine will, and understanding that, energetic boundaries, or just boundaries in life, preferences, so on and so forth, don't mean that you're closing your heart if you're putting up boundaries. Like that's just baloney. So, staying in that innocence, and we can still stay open to the beauty in everything, and also say no to, any negative aspects that are coming forth. Just being like, no, really strong boundary with that. So, I don't want to go on too long, but let me just finish with this. And if we're all creating our own life force, and we're all tapping into our own source through our connection to this higher source, through our connection to the earth, and really working our own field, doing all the things necessary to maintain our health and take care of ourselves, which is equivalent to loving ourselves. We're balancing the hemispheres, right? You can't just be on the left hemisphere. I'm sorry. That's also something that, people talk about. And you can't, if you're just on the right or the left, you're going to be imbalanced. You're not going to be imbalanced. You're going to be off balance. And that's going to be seeping through into your life in one way or another. And you will soon encounter it, because that's just the natural law. Those are the natural laws, right? We can't be lopsided with one thing, because all of a sudden, it might take years, but boom, we'll get hit with all of those things that we negated, So being in sync with the left and the right hemisphere allows us to see how everything's correlated, allows us to see logically and be in reason with things, while at the same time staying open to how it's connecting to other things. Because people who are very, very logical, they often tend to be, they build silos. They specialize so much in that one thing that they can't see how it connects to everything else. And once they lose that connection to how their silo connects to everybody else's silo, then they become closed-minded and rigid, and they lose compassion, actually. And they also lose a deeper understanding. And that's duality, the understanding that there's always another side. So coming into balance within ourselves, really managing, finding, the activities that are needed to balance those two parts of the brain. So important. And this really, I think, is what's going to allow us to create a strong force field around ourselves, in order for us to, it's like a counteractive, it's a counter move to what's happening in the world. Because if you have, for example, the silo of big tech, right? And the silo of big tech is enormous. We're slowly trying to chop off the head of these, these different silos that just have so much power, have so much asymmetrical power over everyone. But imagine their torus field, because everything from a thought to an institution, everything on the planet has its own torus field, right? Electricity and the magnetism that it is creating and generating. And some are sourcing from others, right? Some can have all these different people that are feeding it, right? Who do you want to feed your energy to? What organization, what idea, what belief do you want to feed your energy to? Because that's going to it's going to contribute to that torus field. So you have these huge silos with these huge torus fields around them that cover an expanded space geographically, right? So the more asymmetrical these institutions and like big tech, for example, and all of the companies that make up big tech, the alphabet companies, they can cover like almost the whole globe, right? So then what sort of, it's very difficult to fight that. And so I think that's why people group together, because if you have, and that's where we need to take things, is having all of these smaller groups with their own size torus field, because they've been cultivating and committed to building that energy up, eventually come together and come to those agreements, right? Which takes time, but like we don't really, this is going to happen over the next 2 years. Then that torus field will supersede any other institution or organization that, you know, has negative intentions in which direction they want to take humanity. It will supersede them. And so that will just cover a larger space. And then everybody that geographical area that it covers, anybody who is within that geographical area will be affected by those thoughts, by that consciousness, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of ways to visualize this, and that is a really good way to look at it, because energetically, that's what's happening. So I will leave it at that, and I wish you all a wonderful solar eclipse, really tapping into that energy. And I'm going to be continuing to do this for myself. I got a bunch of things planned. And yeah, I'm just feeling really grateful to be here. I've healed so much. And I'm going to continue to do the healing work so that I can continue to bring forth information. You can check out my website, www.inspiringplayfulevolutions.com, and you can also check out my blog site at www.storytellingforourtimes.com, where you can see the process that I went through. Everything that I bring forth is about being a clear mirror so that people can gain greater knowledge and wisdom. It's been my journey. Starting back at the lockdowns in 2020, everybody turned to their devices. There was the largest data collection that's ever been done for many thousands of years. So what happened was all of the data that was collected allowed these institutions and corporations to gain the most information that they've ever been able to gather about a single individual, and what they term like a global citizen, global digital citizen. So the information gave them access to basically more information than you know about yourself, because AI technology is so advanced and sophisticated. It's able to make calculations that the human cannot yet make unless you have special abilities. But in general, its capacity for programs that are inputted into it to gather information about, everything to do with who you are, your preferences, exactly what you do, your relationships to other people, whether you have good relationships or bad, what your personality is like, what your character is like, what's your the way that you do finances, basically every single thing about you, including all of your biometric information. Prior to that, they were giving out devices. So the purpose of this, we can see it's modeled right now in the world. In China, we have the social credit system. And social credit system is basically, a system that contains all of that information on every citizen of that country. And it allows an external locus of control, so an entity or an agency or a government to control basically how that data is used, and how it's used in the functioning of governance within that country. So it allows them to control citizens based on information that any individual citizen doesn't have about themselves, because AI is way more powerful. It can often foresee what you're going to be doing months before you know it. So this is why AI can pick up on data to, show that you're pregnant, or so on and so forth. So there's an asymmetrical power at play when it comes to this type of social credit system, and that asymmetrical power is used towards an agenda that is based on the values of that government. So, so all of the data that was collected from every person around the globe was collected with the goal of using it for marketing purposes, understanding exactly what your value as a consumer is. So kind of removing this kind of your personhood, and simply seeing you as a consumer within the global economy, and then placing a value on you based on all this information that they have. So these different institutions that are involved basically, have to do with all of the social networks and stuff like that. And although technology has been developed all around the world in many places, a lot of those different pieces of technological advancement have been retrieved through different ambassadors and brought back to different places. Artificial intelligence on the planet, but it also increased asymmetrical power of government institutions. So the more that AI, like all these frequencies, are floating around, there were certain problems that began occurring, and those problems were related to each individual cell phone, computer, picking up on other information from different devices that were around it. So we have Bluetooth, right? And we have wireless internet. And all of these, there's actually, issues, because all of these frequencies tend to interfere with each other. So as time went on, these problems began to increase, and one of the things that happened during the lockdown was that they were actually able to separate all of the devices. And by separating all of the devices, it allowed them to gain like a clear signal on each device to really get the data that they needed, because there was the signal wasn't clear with so much movement and so many devices coming into contact with each other. So by separating everybody having to go into their homes, they were able to associate each device with its owner, with the address where that person lives, and then with their data in specifically. So there wasn't as much confusion. They were able to sort through the data much more clearly, which is part of this whole world government, like one of the goals that they had to attain to reach like global social credit system. So from there, we can look at how the social networks, going back to the social networks expanding, we have the networking of these institutions, the universities, and then we have the networking of all these social applications, social media apps. And the expansion of that network across the globe is owned primarily by one or two companies. All of this information is being funneled through and being managed. And these silos have gained so much momentum in regards to concentrating what is happening with AI, like what it's being used for, what the data collecting, where it's going. This timeline that arose was when these other smaller, like just people popping up all around the grid and creating their own technology and creating their own apps, their own servers, and not having it run through the corporate servers. Though that's like another grid that exists on top of the grid, the corporate AI grid. But if you can imagine these little guys, these decentralized servers and apps and networks and all this just kind of like popping up, and they don't really grow that tall because they're not centralized, and so their field only expands to cover so much geographical area. So we're having to chop off the head of this AI corporate tower, and that's what we're currently working to remove, all this power from these different corporations, and have them be held accountable for what they're doing with the data, for what their goals and their end means are for collecting it, and which institutions they're giving it to, which governments, what government institutions and agencies are using it for. And everybody wants to participate in how that information is used. And everybody wants to be able to make a decision on whether or not they want a global social credit system implemented or not. It's not just going to be one government, one global government, which will decide that, because unfortunately, governments have proven themselves to constantly put profit above people's well-being over and over again throughout history, so they cannot be trusted. So it is imperative that we ensure that we continue to grow the decentralized networks, and we continue to chop the head off of this tower to reduce the size of the torus field that is their locus of control, which is very big right now because the tower is very big and all the data is still funneling into there. But the more that these decentralized networks and servers continue to grow, the tower will eventually shrink down. But right now, it's at this very pivotal moment where the tower is still very high. Tons of people are no longer subscribing with different social media networks, and that helps to decentralize where the power is. But more people still need to get involved, and more people still need to understand why it affects them, changing our decisions in consequence of that. So we have to really step up on that. And this will allow the power of these corporations to diminish, and they will have less asymmetrical power over us. Social credit system, there are people who think it's a good idea because it will diminish, all sorts of injustices and violence and that sort of thing. But we have already been implementing our own social credit system. Like, we can trust humans to do that. Social networks exist naturally. It's part of our biological behavior. It's one of the three streams, primary streams coming in, which is survival and procreation and social interaction. And we are constantly keeping each other in check. This happens naturally. We naturally do this. And we are naturally going out, doing research and discovering information, and then, bringing that information forward so that if there are injustices in the world, that we address them and we continue to heal globally. So we don't need an institution or agency or a government to do that for us. We are already doing that ourselves. And so as we continue to increase our awareness, this tower is going to diminish. And as power continues to decentralize, we're going to be, in my opinion, returning to different models, different indigenous practices, different models from the past that got overtaken after colonialization and after the Industrial Revolution, which are going to be re-implemented into societies that are going to allow us to move into different models of education, health, and welfare that are going to no longer require a centralized institution to make those decisions for us. Because, again, what we've seen is that a lot of these decisions, once the power gets too centralized, the well-being of the people are no longer taken into consideration. And so we're going to be returning to these smaller models, these grassroots models where, apprenticeship and people really getting into learning, doing the self-gnosis work, learning about who they are, learning about their ancestors, to have this beautiful diversity around the planet continue to flourish, so that everybody doesn't get funneled into the very darker forms of transhumanism, which basically remove the person's identity entirely and just give them a number, and they become a consumer in this AI tech economy platform. So we're moving away from that, and we're going to continue to decentralize. We're going to continue to bring in these wisdom teachings that allow us to rise back up with these newer models combined with ancient wisdom. And slowly, all of these power heads that have misused, that are getting called out all across the globe. Like, there is no doubt that, any of them are going to get away with anything in my mind. But we have to continue to bring forth information, bring forth awareness, continue to do research. And if you are truly, working on increasing your well-being, then you're going to come across the information as you do, your self-care practices and your research that's tuned into that practice of self-love and healing, you're going to come across the information that you need to come across to see what is happening in the world, and where you might have been, indoctrinated into certain ideas, hypnotized into certain beliefs, and you'll just have that curiosity more and more as time goes on to go and look for yourself, because media is also very much centralized, and it has an asymmetrical power over people. Most main media outlets currently existing right now do not have the well-being of people in mind, and mostly the information is misconstrued because it is basically being funded by corporations and government agendas and so forth. So this is just some research that I've done, but I really felt like it was important to bring this forward at this time. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to add anything, please do in the comments below. Thank you for listening. I just wanted to add in quickly that something, as soon as you start going out of body, it's quite miraculous how everyone wants you to sign a contract with them. So we're talking about different groups and, you know, these different grids of consciousness. Like, everybody's got their intentions, right? So something has come in. Maybe I can have some feedback. Sickness. It just keeps on coming up, and there's something to do with moving the AI timeline off, kind of like, hitting it, so to speak, at the knees even more. Something I've been working on for many years now. And it's regarding a contract to do with Renegade. And I don't know if anybody has feedback, but if anybody does have feedback and they're working on this, or there's something actual, I'm just sort of testing out the field here. Yeah,